I used to think that confidence was something other people were just born with. The magnetic women, the ones who would walk into a room and seem completely at ease. They could talk with anyone, they could wear what they wanted to wear, they did what they wanted to do, said what was on their minds. But I kept waiting for that to click for me, and it just never did. And so over the course of my life, trying to kind of reclaim confidence and doing all these exercises and taking classes and reading the books, I kind of realized something. And maybe you felt that too. What if I never really had confidence to begin with? And if that lands with you, if you're over 50 and you're feeling overwhelmed by self-doubt or negativity, just stick with me because in this video, we're not just talking about why this happens. We're going to start rewiring how we see ourselves. And so we can finally begin to feel more grounded, more happy, and whole. Okay? So let's walk through 5 core ideas that will help us understand why confidence has felt so elusive and how we can start reclaiming it from the ground up. So, the first one, why we women over 50 have never felt truly confident. Um, so let's start with a truth that we rarely talk about, right? Most women over 50 were really never taught to build confidence, only to perform competence. Now, that sentence is something that deserves a lot of exploration. And so, what I did was instead of bogging everyone down here with that, I've written a companion blog article specifically on that sentence. And I've linked that blog article in the description below. This is how powerful that concept is. And basically, what I'm saying is we're raised to be agreeable, to please, to be liked for the most part. And if we were praised, it was for being responsible, reliable, resilient under pressure, not for knowing ourselves or trusting our own voice. So think about it, right? Confidence at its core is the belief that you can trust yourself. But what happens for decades um, when your value is measured by how well you meet other people's needs, right? So, as young girls, many of us learned that self-trust was selfish. We got socialized into silencing our desires to avoid conflict, to earn approval, to keep the peace. And over time, we became fluent in caretaking and perfectionism, but emotionally illiterate when it came to our own needs. So here's a simple but powerful reflection. When was the last time you asked yourself, what do I want? Not what's expected, not what's polite, but what your deepest self actually wants. Now, if that question feels hard to answer, it's not a personal flaw, it's just an echo of a lifetime of conditioning. And that conditioning doesn't just disappear with age, right? This is a period of our lives where the gap between how we've lived so far and who we truly are, it becomes painfully obvious. So for years, maybe even decades, you may have done everything right. Maybe you built a career, you held a household together, you showed up for everyone else. But here's the trap. Being competent isn't the same as being confident. And overachieving doesn't mean you trust yourself. It just means that you know how to perform. So let me share something that is personal, right? I once led a strategy retreat, like it was an executive strategy retreat, where every woman in the room, all highly accomplished, really smart, many of them admitted that they constantly feared that they weren't enough. One woman in particular who had just been named to a national board looked at me right in the eye and said, I keep waiting to feel like I'm the woman that they think I should be. And that really stuck with me because here's what I realized. We can climb the ladder, we can hold it all together and still feel like a stranger to ourselves and still feel a baseline of unhappiness. No one ever taught us that being enough comes from within. Now, here's the turning point, right? At this stage, whether it's due to menopause, empty nesting, job transitions, health changes, or sheer emotional exhaustion, and maybe even all of it, this kind of scaffolding starts to fall away. The roles that we've built our identity around, whether it's mother, partner, boss, caregiver, they begin to shift and maybe even disappear. And suddenly we're standing there asking, if I'm not who I've always been to everyone else, who am I? So this is what we call the confidence gap. It's not a crisis, but it's a portal because the buried beneath the rubble of who we've had to be all of our lives is the truth of who we really are. So let's pause here for a moment because a lot of the work that we're going to be doing is practical, right? Grounded in practical. So let's do a little exercise. If you want, put your hand on your heart. You can take a slow breath to kind of bring you into this moment. And then ask yourself, what version of me is asking to emerge now that the noise has quieted? Right? So let that question sit with you. Maybe you want to write about it in your journal. If you exercise, if you take your daily walks, when you're in the shower, just think about that. Because again, confidence isn't about reclaiming who you used to be. It's about finally meeting the version of you who's been waiting patiently to come alive. So if you've been wondering why you've never really felt confident, again, it's not because you're broken, it's because you were never given the space, the safety, or the tools to build that self-trust. But now you, we, me, we're in a place, the time in our lives where we can. And it begins not with a loud declaration, but with the decision to start listening to yourself again. So let's talk a little bit about the voice in your head that might consistently talk, that won't stop whispering. And this is an important part of kind of launching yourself into the next phase, right? This voice may be saying to yourself, I'm too late, I'm not good enough, why even try? Right? Does any of that sound familiar? I know I struggle with that all the time. This voice isn't just self-doubt, it's our brain doing what it thinks it's supposed to do. And that brings us to something incredibly important, which is this concept of negativity bias, right? Negativity bias is a built-in survival mechanism. Psychologists have shown that our brains are naturally wired to notice what's wrong more than what's right. Right? In fact, negative stimuli produce more neural activity than positive stimuli, and we remember them more vividly. So, from an evolutionary standpoint, this made sense, right? Our ancestors didn't need to remember how beautiful the sunrise was. They needed to remember which berry made them sick, which noise meant danger, and which path led to pain. But, fast forward to today, and this ancient wiring is still running in the background. Only now the threats aren't lions or poisonous berries. They're things like rejection, our feelings about aging, career stagnation, or comparison. So when you walk into a room and think, I don't belong here, or when you look into the mirror and suddenly zoom in on what you don't like about what you're seeing, that's not because you're being negative. It's because your brain is trying to protect you. But here's the thing, that survival tool can easily become a prison. Okay? Over time, if we're not aware of it, negativity bias shapes our entire worldview. It becomes a kind of internal lens, one that filters out the good, filters out the beautiful, the brave, and then just zooms in on the fear, the flaw, the failure. And here's how it might show up in your daily life. You get 10 compliments, but the one piece of criticism, that's the one you ruminate on. You take a risk and it doesn't pan out immediately. You're thinking, see, I knew it wouldn't work. I'm a failure. Or you hesitate to start something new because the voice within you says, don't embarrass yourself. You're just going to fail, all that kind of stuff. Now, this doesn't just affect your mood, it shapes your entire identity. Your brain starts confirming a painful story. I can't trust myself. I'm not built for this. This is just who I am. But none of that is actually true. It's just a story your brain has rehearsed so many times that it thinks it's reality. So, how do we begin to change this? Because I believe we can change these things. We are not stuck. We are not predetermined to live these painful stories. So, the first thing we need to do is we need to try not to force it away, right? Negativity bias doesn't respond to shame or brute force. It responds to conscious awareness. Now, here's a practice that I often use with clients and even myself, and I call it the three-part catch and pivot exercise, right? So the first step is we're going to catch it. When a negative thought hits, we're going to pause. We're going to name it without judgment, and we're going to say something like, that's a fear-based thought, right? That's naming it without judging it. This small act of awareness interrupts our autopilot. Then we're going to do what I call the compassionate curiosity. We're going to ask ourselves, what is this thought trying to protect me from? We may find it's not weakness, it's your mind or your brain trying to avoid pain. And then we're going to pivot gently. We're going to shift that thought by like 5 degrees, a small shift from I'll fail again to I've failed before and still kept going. From I'm a mess to I'm learning to sort through the mess. From I can't to I haven't figured this out yet. These are not affirmations. These are upgrades in your thinking. These are honest, they're hopeful, they're human. So again, we don't need to erase every negative thought to build confidence because that's going to be a huge task. We just need to become someone who notices them and chooses moment by moment not to give them all the power. And that is how you begin to reclaim trust in yourself. It's not through perfection, but through presence. And maybe that's where confidence will begin. Okay, so again, let's be real. When you're like deep in a spiral, again, logic doesn't help. And you know the kind of moment I'm talking about, right? A simple thought. Maybe it's about your aging body, your flatline career, your relationship status, your finances. That single thought starts to snowball. And before you know it, you've mentally fast forwarded to like you're living under a bridge, you're totally alone, you're utterly irrelevant. You're wondering how life got away from you. Now, if that sounds dramatic, it might be, but I can tell you from my experience, these are things that I have had running through my brain. Um, so if you've ever felt like your thoughts were running the show, it's really not being dramatic per se. It's exhausting. So here's what's important to understand. These thought spirals aren't a sign that you're weak or broken. They're a sign that your brain is working just too efficiently in a direction that doesn't actually help you. Neuroscience shows that our brains build neural pathways the same way water carves a path in soil. The more you think a certain thought, the easier it is to think it again. And then eventually those thoughts stop feeling like thoughts and start feeling like truth. And this is a little dangerous for those of us who are, maybe high achieving, we're self-aware women, because we're used to solving problems through analysis. But when you overanalyze yourself, your confidence crumbles. You're crumbling under the weight of thoughts like, what's wrong with me? Kind of thinking. So that's where reframing becomes your superpower. Not to deny what you're feeling, but to interrupt the trajectory. So let's try something together. Instead of saying, I'm not confident, say, I haven't practiced self-trust yet. Instead of saying, I always screw things up, say, I'm still figuring this part out. Instead of saying, I'm a mess, shift to something like, I'm in the middle of a big transition. And see how that lands. Again, we're not pretending things are perfect. We're just telling the truth in a way that includes hope and possibility, not just pain. Words are powerful because they create the frame our brains operate within. And most women over 50 were raised on frames of deficiency. We were trained to spot flaws, apologize for taking up space, and speak about ourselves in self-deprecating ways so we don't seem arrogant. But if confidence is rooted in self-trust, then every time you speak with compassion to yourself, you're laying down a new path in your brain, one that leads toward more happiness, more groundedness, more well-being. So here's another coaching tool you might want to try, right? If you keep a journal, open your journal and write this question at the top of the page. If I spoke to myself today like someone I deeply respected and adored, what would I say? Don't overthink it, just let the words flow. Then take one sentence from that entry and post it on your mirror, maybe on your phone or in your planner tomorrow, and let it interrupt your default loop. Because again, confidence isn't built by force. It's cultivated through these micro moments of self-kindness. So when your mind starts to spiral, don't try to shut it down. You just need to offer it a new trailhead, a softer place to begin. Because every reframe is a tiny act of rebellion, a conscious choice to believe that your story isn't over, that your thoughts are powerful, but they don't get the final word. So again, let's just take a quick moment now, right? Take a nice deep breath, because these deep breaths bring us into the moment. They help ground us. If the first few sections of this session felt intense, it's because they actually are. Recognizing how long we've been carrying these stories of inadequacy, that's no small thing. And this is something that I will be exploring much more in depth over the course of several videos because it's very, very powerful. Now, what if I told you that healing doesn't always begin with a big breakthrough? That sometimes the return to ourselves, the installation of our happiness operating system, starts with something small, and it could be as small as a slow breath. Okay. So in the personal growth world, confidence is often portrayed as a state to achieve. But what if it's really a rhythm to return to? Groundedness is the felt sense that says, I am here, I am safe, I'm allowed to take up space, not performatively, but viscerally. And here's what the science tells us. Our nervous system doesn't respond to logic, it responds to sensation. That means in moments of self doubt or spiraling thoughts, trying to think your way out of it doesn't work, or even using affirmations or positive thinking doesn't really work. But you can anchor yourself in your body. And that's where real regulation and the rebuilding of trust begins. So, what are these micro moments of groundedness? They're the fleeting but potent seconds where you feel fully present. They don't have to be dramatic. In fact, they're often mundane, right? Like some examples, running warm water over your hands and actually feeling it. Placing one hand on your heart and saying to yourself, I am here. Standing barefoot in the grass and letting the earth hold you. Watching the way a tree sways in the breeze and noticing, that you may feel steadier just by observing that. Nature is a great healer. So I always recommend nature as part of our regrowth strategies. They're not just poetic wellness ideas. They are neurobiological reset buttons. And every time we do one of these things, we're signaling to our brain, the fear center of our brain in particular, that we're safe. Safety is the soil where confidence grows. And the more that you practice this kind of grounding work, the more you reconnect, not just with your body, but with your belonging. So let's do a simple embodiment exercise. I know this video is full of exercises, which you can certainly revisit. But here's a very simple embodiment exercise that you can do right now. You can do this while you're sitting or while you're standing. So you can place both feet flat on the floor, right? And just feel the floor supporting you. You're just allowing yourself to be held by the floor. If you're outside, you're allowing the earth to hold you. Now bring attention to your breath. Don't try to change your breathing, just notice it. If it's shallow, it's shallow. If you're taking deep breaths, that's fine too. You're just noticing it. And then just place one hand on your belly, one on your chest. And as you continue breathing, say to yourself, whether it's internally or out loud, this is my body. This is my breath. This is my life. And then ask yourself, what part of me feels most present right now? Knowing that there's no right answer. Maybe it's your breath. Maybe it's your hands. Maybe it's the rhythm of your heartbeat. Whatever it is, just notice it. Just know that you're not lost. You are here. And again, groundedness, happiness doesn't come from finally having it all figured out. It comes from choosing presence in the midst of uncertainty. It's choosing to slow down, not because everything is okay, but because you're remembering that you're okay even when everything isn't. These micro moments are sacred. They are your way back to yourself, not all at once, but breath by breath. Okay, so by now you're probably realizing that something that's, maybe comforting and maybe even disorienting. Confidence isn't a finish line. Neither is happiness. It's not something you earn by ticking off achievements or pushing through the pain. In fact, the very idea that you need to feel better before you take action or show up might be the very thing that's holding you back. because the first real step isn't feeling better, it's noticing differently. Awareness is key. Most help advice focuses on shifting from negative to positive. But here's what deeper coaching and brain science teaches us. Before transformation comes observation. Before you can change anything, you have to be willing to see it clearly, to notice it without judgment. It means, noticing when you shrink yourself in conversation, noticing when you bypass your own needs to keep the peace. It's noticing the tone you use when you speak to yourself. Not to criticize, but to say, oh, that's the story I'm living from. Do I still want it? This is what mindfulness researcher Dr. Ellen Langer calls the noticing muscle. And it's the one that makes every other shift possible. Because once you begin to notice differently, you begin to unlock a new kind of power, which is choice. So many women over 50 are living with identities built on survival, expectation, and caretaking, not by design, but by default. But none of us are obligated to be the woman that we were yesterday, right? It's at this point we get to ask ourselves, what am I available for now? What am I done pretending to be? What version of me feels like the truth, not performance? And when you start to live those questions, not with pressure, but with presence, you begin to reorient your inner compass. You stop letting your past define your self-worth and start letting your awareness shape your next becoming. So here's another exercise. I know I have a million of them. Uh, this is a really potent journaling exercise if you wanted something specific. I give this to many of my clients, especially those of us, particularly in this time of our lives, we're navigating a major transition. I call it the Noticing Differently tracker. So at the end of each day, you can jot down one moment you caught yourself shrinking or spiraling, what you said to yourself afterward, like for instance, maybe you caught yourself noticing you didn't speak up in the meeting. And then what you said to yourself afterward was, that's so typical. I always mess this up. And then you end with one reframe you wish you had offered. For example, I noticed I held back. That's okay. I'm practicing self-expression. This is how you start training your brain to shift its pattern, not by force, but through consistent awareness. And over time, the story will change. Not because you fought your old thoughts, because you replaced them with wiser, kinder, and more aligned truths. Again, you don't have to wait to feel confident before you take that next step. You only have to notice that you're already becoming the kind of woman who does. Noticing differently is the new doing. And that is how confidence and happiness begins. It might be quiet, it might be gradual, but it is honest. So if you've been thinking, I don't know how to fix this, I don't even know where to begin, I want you to pause and take this in. You've already begun. Because the moment you start noticing differently without shaming yourself, without rushing to fix anything, that's the moment your old story starts to loosen its grip. You're not waiting for a breakthrough. You're living the first steps of your return. And as you begin to shift out of negativity, a new question will arise to the surface, one that's probably haunted many women over 50. Why do I still feel invisible even when I'm doing the work? Maybe your voice still feels overlooked. Maybe you're in a room full of people and feel like you're fading into the background. Or maybe it's just that when you look in the mirror, the woman staring back feels a little less seen even by you. Now, if that's been something that's tugging at you, within you, then our next session, our spark session, is exactly what you need. And I call it feeling invisible, how to reclaim presence and be seen again. And we're going to unpack where that feeling of invisibility really comes from and how to reawaken your magnetic presence from the inside out. Now, before we say goodbye for the day, if this video spoke to you, if you felt even a flicker of recognition, a breath of relief, a sense that maybe there's still more for you, then I want to give you something. This is my no regrets checklist and workbook. It's 10 steps to start living fully after 50. Now, this isn't fluff. It's the exact guide I wish I had when I was clawing my way out of self-doubt and overwhelm that kind of crashed down on my head when I turned 50. Um, Inside this worksheet, you're going to find 10 simple but powerful questions and exercises designed specifically for women like us, women who are ready to stop just getting by and start living from clarity, vitality, truth, and to start installing what I like to call our happiness operating system. Because we don't need another plan to fix ourselves. We need a path that helps us come home to ourselves. I've included a link to that in the description below. So click on that, get your free copy of that. It's your next step forward. And I'll be right here cheering you on every step of the way. And I'll see you in the next episode. Enjoy the rest of your day.